Hello, juniors. It's me again. Seems like this is like an every week thing. You see me, I'm here, but I'm really not. But anyway, hope you all are doing well. And wanted to take a little bit of time today to do a video lecture on chapter 15. So make sure you do your readings before you come to class. That really looks at enhancing family functioning and relationships. So for many of us who are going into either clinical or direct social work practice, this will probably be the hallmark of what we do and spend most of our time. And this is where I spent most of my career actually in terms of working with family. So without any further ado, let's jump into today's conversation. All right. So when we are looking at our objectives for today, so when we're looking at chapter 15, the takeaways are these. We're going to look at the different intervention and change strategies that we need to work with within these family systems. We're going to look at how do we change the interactions, the modifications, because people come to us because they've had significant issues around functioning or bad behavior. We're going to assist families in influencing the roles and what needs to be changing. So, understanding what those roles are in the family in terms of the individuals and the systems and how they get along, as well as increasing those communication pieces. So, those are the things that we're really kind of taking a look at today. We're also going to be assisting family members in disengaging in conflict, modifying those misconceptions or cognitive distortions, or how they think about things or how they perceive particular information from others, as well as we're going to modify those family alignments. And we will talk more about that whole piece. So, first off, we need to look at family engagement. And so, as you think about the generalist intervention model, engagement is the first thing that we actually need to do. So these things here on the screen are things that we need to pay attention to as you are starting to think about your work with families. Thinking about, in some settings, it makes sense to insist that all the members participate. Sometimes it may make sense to have some folks be a part of the process and others not, but it just depends on the scope of the issues that the family is actually dealing with. Um, Making some decisions about who's going to engage in interventions, and then looking at who has the right to choose to be a part of this particular process, and for people to actually bring in full selves and be self-determined and to be able to do this in the context of not being blamed or judged or shamed as they share the things that are happening for them in the context of their family. So this engagement piece also really looks at these things as well too. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to just kind of read through this piece. So again here, just kind of in summary, it's around looking at the power dynamic and the decision-making authority that's happening in the family. Who's able to do what teams or what subsystems get together and make the rules or decide how things are going to work. Or is there one particular person who drives the entire particular process? So again, we need to be able to honor the client's preference in terms of how the family makes decisions, because there are sometimes cultural aspects to how those decisions gets made, and we need to be respectful of what those particular pieces are. So not coming in imposing our will on the family in terms of what we feel like they need to do, but them really sharing with us how things work within the context of their family and in their culture. So joining, we got to become a part of the team. So we join in with the family. We confirm and support the family's needs and experiences. Um, we adopt that family perspective in terms of I'm in the family now. We're working to try to figure out what are the issues that brings the need for my services to in the first place. We also will be looking at clinical research in family therapy to look at what are the types of interventions that work best with these types of families and how do we maintain those relationships. So joining is a very important aspect of that whole engagement process as well. And also looking at the cultural perspectives. I can't overemphasize this enough that while we may have similar techniques in terms of interventions that we will employ in terms of working with families, we have to do it within the context of what's acceptable for that particular family. So that engagement process is strongly influenced by cultural differences between social workers and the families they serve. So an example might be that I, as an African American male, may have an easier time engaging with an African American family because we have cultural similarities. Their chances are we have been raised in some similar contexts, regardless of what part of the country we were actually in, because of things that happen for the Black community. And so I might have an easier time than a person who is not African American in terms of being able to engage with the family because there's some different levels of trust that may already be established just by virtue of who shows up in the room. So these are things that you need to be aware of. And then also the opposite of that is true. So if you're coming from a different culture and you're working with a culture that you're not familiar with, it's about how do you join that family? How do you understand what's important to them? How do you move forward? What are the idiosyncrasies in this particular family? What are the communication patterns? Um, all those particular things. So culture should not be used, in terms of condoning some high risk behaviors or that basically inhibit human rights. So again, culture can't be the end all stop all to say, if I decide that I want to physically discipline my children because that's a cultural piece, well, yeah, we're looking at a basic human rights. We're also looking at potential violations of the law in terms of child protection types of issues. So we have to take that into context and actually help families understand those kind of dynamics as well. Um, the differences in communication styles. So, all of us have our own worldview frames that frames our emotional experiences. So, how I see it may not be the way that my family sees it or that someone else sees it. And recognizing that we need to be open to that whole different piece in terms of how that piece works, or it just doesn't, is not a part of that language. Um, Low context and high context. Um, Communities. So, for an example, when we think about high context communities, there's a lot of nonverbal expression that are taking place. In a previous video, I think I shared with you all in Understanding Families, I talked about a situation where I, as a kid, in a high context culture, I might add, African American, where elders in my community could communicate with me with a simple glance and give me a ton of information about what I need to be doing differently at that particular time and never actually even open their mouth. But again, it's around high context, relying on some of those nonverbal pieces. I know what a nod means. I know what a stare means. I know what an eye roll means in terms of what I need to be doing different. And then when you think about low context culture, then it's about folks who really put a lot of emphasis on the verbal message. So I've got to talk to you so that you can understand what it is I'm doing. So there's a difference in terms of that, but it becomes important for you as a social worker to really understand that communication style, the primary communication style of the family that you are working with. Hierarchical considerations in communication. Again, paying attention to who communicates, who asks questions, who responds, who aligns with whom else, who supports the other, who is in direct conflict. Those are all things that you as a social worker need to be paying close attention to in terms of really trying to understand the dynamics around the family. And then consulting with those family members about decisions for those family members whom they may want to consult. Um, Also, if we've got issues around language, we need to make sure that um, we're not relying on an English speaking member of the family if we are only English speaking and there's a language barrier. It might even be better to look at whether we need to have an interpreter be a part of that dialogue because giving that family member the ability to interpret um, sets up a different dynamic in terms of power because the person can interpret literally what they want to interpret, and we would have no way of knowing that particular piece, and it could be very misleading for the entire therapeutic process. So it's something just to be aware of. Also, recognizing the authority of the social worker really kind of depends on culture, race, and ethnicity. And there are some cultures where the authority figure is revered and is definitely in lead and in control. There are other cultural dynamics where that is not the case. So um, you're also oftentimes perceived as this knowledgeable expert and can guide that particular course of action for the family. Um, And then asking families how they would like to be addressed always helps that particular relationship, rather than walking into the home saying, hi, Jan, and hi, Frank, you're the parent. How do you want me to refer to you? Do you want me to call you Mrs. Jones, Mr. Jones? Is Jan okay? Is Frank okay? But getting permission from the family really conveys respect as well. So you want to make sure you do that in terms of your own authority. Alliances with one family member based on commonalities in results with the other family members feeling marginalized or excluding from being in the helping process. So again, paying attention to those alliances, to those subsystems that you start to see to set up. And if you listen to the conversations and the communications, you'll get a sense of who's aligning with who, but to make sure that you are not creating a dynamic where you're marginalizing other members of the families who need to have a part. Because remember, this is a whole group process, everybody's in the family. And so, what happens within the context of the family getting themselves to a much more healthy place is going to involve all the members. And so, we have to make sure that everybody has some voice in terms of being able to share in that particular process. Giving equal time, recognizing the power and authority in the family social worker relationship, especially between ethnic and racial minorities. Very important thing to pay attention to, because authority is assigned to you as a professional. You need to recognize the importance of that particular aspect when it's coming from the family. So we don't want to have alliances formed. We want everybody to be free to be who they are, and that we're not doing any aligning. So making sure that we pay attention to those kind of things. The dynamics of minority status culture in exploring reservations. So clients who identify with groups who have been historically disenfranchised may exhibit reservations about seeking help. Systemically, this is actually very true. Um, when you study the history of many communities of color in this country, they have not had a very good, how should I say, it has been a difficult road in most instances. So we think about our American Indian brothers and sisters and the colonization and the torture and the land grabs and the genocide, and you think about African slaves who were brought over as property and sold and discriminated against for hundreds of years. I mean, and we think about, our Latino populations and folks from Mexico, and how at one point in time Mexico um, had a huge part of the United States, or owned a huge part of the United States, and how that particular process played itself out politically and through war, and that land was also taken. So when we think about those kind of things, and those are just three examples that I can think of right off the top of my head, not to mention the immigrants who are coming to this particular country, even currently from different parts of Africa, from different parts of Asia, or from different parts of Europe and other parts of the world. So recognizing that brown people, people of color, typically have historically been disenfranchised from those particular things. So asking for help or being in a position to get help is something that might not necessarily be seen as helpful in our particular communities because of that. So just recognize that when you go into those situations and you may run into some resistance, this is what it's about. And it's really about understanding those pieces. And so for you, then, the importance around the culture of humility, being able to understand and learn more about your clients and what their experience has been in this world is going to be really important. And then also really moving away from those anti-oppressive practice strategies. So most social service agencies are kind of geared towards this means tested hierarchical, follow the particular dots and rules and regulations. Um, but those particular processes have proven themselves to be oppressive, because when we start to look at the results of people who interface with these particular agencies and look at the data based on race, you can see that people of color oftentimes, in most instances, have much lower levels of success than those who are not. So again, making sure that you're not being a part of the problem by coming in the door with a suppressive piece about all of the things that have to be in place. Orchestrating that initial family session, bringing the family together, doing that whole joining piece, doing some rapport building, getting people's experiences out and on the table, and then working towards goals in terms of what you want to see happen differently. establishing relationship with individual members and alliance with the family. So you are a part of the alliance with this family to actually get them to a better place of how they want to function. And we've got a task of establishing that relationship, but keeping everybody connected as a social worker. You're socializing, you're doing joining techniques, you're looking at respecting the culture, the family norms, the rules, the level of functioning, and the empathetic responses. So all of these are things that you're going to have to pay attention to as you are working with these family. Clarifying those expectations and those reservations. So family members often have varying perceptions of the helping process. So it's going to be essential and crucial for you as a social worker to really explain what it is you're trying to accomplish, what it is you're trying to do in terms of your work with the family, so that everybody has a real clear understanding about what we're going to do. There have been times where I've walked into families and people say, oh, "Okay, here's a social worker. He's here to fix us." Yeah, that's not really accurate. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to help understand, explore, and assess what some of the issues are, and then we can kind of come together on coming up with ways to minimize those kind of things and to increase the function of the family. But I can't fix you. That's not the expectation. So making sure you set realistic expectations for your particular clients is going to be really important. Personality or culture aside, certain family members will continue to have strong reservations. So everybody's not going to always be on board, and sometimes you just have to learn to work within that context. And then be sensitive to those people who are just not willing to just kind of tie in and be a part of that particular process, and recognize that these behaviors can be self-protective as well. Um, so just to for you to again, a lot of work for you to do in terms of working with the family, and a lot of responsibility for you as well. You also want to elicit the perception of the problem from the families. Oftentimes, you may be able to do a session or two with a family and recognize right away what some of the issues are, and that's fine, except for it doesn't really manifest itself until the members of the families understand what the issues are. So they have to bring them to you, and we have to work together to get them to that place of understanding what some of the issues are and what some of the potential solutions are. So you want to get feedback from everybody who's involved. So even if it comes in because I've got one particular child who is behaving poorly or using drugs or doing whatever they may be, that particular person has a perspective as well about what's happening inside of that family that should be heard and should be honored. So interpretation of those roles, looking at gender, looking at power, looking at boundaries are also important things you're going to need to do as well. Defining the family. Um, I'm sorry. Oh, I went too far here. Defining the family problem, using the family systems approach, emphasize every member's piece is important. Um, you know, you may have a situation where people are always blaming other folks, but you need to be able to move in and really try to address those things as they kind of come up. Um, Making sure that you counteract behavior or patterns of behavior that are attributed to blaming and labeling. You don't want to have one person have all the issues in the family land on their shoulders. Emphasizing those individual and family strengths. So I'm going to take a minute and let you take a look at this piece in terms of what kind of things you can be doing as it relates to that. So looking at all those strengths, looking at the family interventions, first order strategies resolve to presenting problems with regard to modifying the family structure. Second order, modifying the family structures as a primary vehicle for problem solving. Um, First and second change strategies are consistent with the family's perspective, so making sure that culturally it lines up, and that the interventions rest on a thorough assessment and family resiliency. It can be leveraged in support of that particular change. Looking also at the problem solving approach in terms of the readings in chapter 13, using that problem solving approach to recognize power hierarchy in the problem process, and being attentive to those socio political factors as well. Skills training is another different technique that we can utilize in terms of teaching core skills to and activities to that particular family or family members in terms of looking at evidence-based interventions that actually work, where we can teach people how to do things in a different way. Um, So that skill deficit, once we ascertain that people just don't know how to do certain things. I might have been brought up in a family where, uh, you know, we didn't communicate when we got angry. We just threw things or broke things, or we just didn't talk to each other for days. So then we have a process where I might have a member of a family who has literally all their lives not been able to communicate when they were angry. And so there's a skill deficit there. So maybe one of the things that we work on is how to actually teach people to respond in better ways when they are actually angry. Um, so again, looking at that whole skill training as a technique is going to be really important based on what that family's needs are. Contingency contracting, looking at getting people to agree, like, well, we're going to agree that this is harmful behavior, that we're not going to actually do that. And then we're going to also come up with code words to remind people that when we're involved in that particular behavior outside of therapy, that we can do things a little bit different. So everybody kind of agrees to that particular piece, and we have this agreement in place around how we're going to actually try to change how folks reciprocate and how they function with each other, doing it that way. Um, Initial tasks should be just things that you can simply agree on in terms of what we're going to do. Um, and if one or more family members is not fulfilling their parts of the agreement, you can focus on the obstacles that's preventing them from doing so. Because, sometimes there are things that keep people from locked into that same old behavior. So it's really about trying to understand what some of those things actually are. That second order strange strategy is again aimed to adopt the family structural characteristics. So who's in the power seats, who drives what are the alliances, what are the subsystems, the norms, and the rules, and really look at, are there different ways to adapt that functioning for that particular family. So again, really looking at the second order change strategies presenting issues indirectly through changes in the family structure and characteristics. So looking at having things done in a different way. Also recognizing and misconceptions and cognitive distortions. These are beliefs that lead to dissatisfaction in families. If kids should be seen and not heard, and so that's the way I was raised. That's my cognitive belief. And so my kids don't have an opinion about anything. And you can see how that can lead to a lot of issues in terms of how their family might be functioning. But it's about how do we address that cognitive distortion or that erroneous belief or that misconception or that myth by using empathy to really help people understand that when you create that dynamic or you continue to pass that on because it's what's happened for you, that this is the damage that it does for the other members of your family. So really recognizing that piece and creating that cognitive dissonance for folks as well in terms of being able to look at how to address those repetitive dysfunctional interactions, right? And then modifying those communication patterns. Communication approaches to families consist of working with families to develop clear communication, not how you say something or how I interpret it or what I believe that it actually means, but to be real clear to make sure that what the sender believes the message is not necessarily what the receiver understands the message to be. So this can be a difficult relationship between the sender and receiver and also constrain the distorted message. So recognizing those communication patterns and making sure that we're doing those things. Giving that feedback is going to be very, very important in terms of how we move forward. So I'll give you a minute to kind of look at these items here. This is around positive communication. This is the second part of that. Modifying those family rules in terms of, maybe we need to change how things are structured in terms of the range of behaviors in the sequence in the interactions or reactions to a particular event. And also note that dysfunctional families can severely impair the functioning of family members. So again, recognizing that there are the cost, or should I say, the importance of getting things done differently for those families can have long-term effects in terms of other family members as well. So making sure that if we need to look at modifying the rules in the family to make sure that we don't do harm down the road, that's something that we need to really pay attention to. Modifying and family alignments, so making sure that those unhealthy dynamics in terms of the affiliation between certain parties is broken up. Structural family therapy is a really good way to look at those subsystems boundaries and how we use power to kind of bring about the change in those sessions as well. Structural mapping identifies the symptoms that can be exhibited by the individual family members as an expression of difficulties of the family system. So not necessarily scapegoating one particular individual, but really starting to look at the behavior and the symptoms as something that's much larger in terms of how it plays itself out in the family system. And then really looking at exploring those relationships and alignments beyond the immediate family. So again, mapping what the family boundaries are, highlighting the interaction and the transactional patterns are really important in terms of helping families move forward. Family sculpting is this technique which allows family members to communicate spatial family system relationships in nonverbal, tabule, discerning alignments, and recognize the need to realign relationships. If things aren't working between mom and daughter, and looking at really what some of those things are around that relationship, how do we restructure that, or how do we sculpt that in a different way? Where they're instructed to physically arrange family members in a way to persuade perceptions of others. So really promising technique as well. Joined families, developing cohesive unity for more aligned, effective alignment and challenges that often confront two families who have joined together. So we've got these blended families. I'm married, I'm bringing my kids, you're married, you're bringing your kids. What is that going to look like? Because we have two different systems that are coming together. And really understanding that, you know, most times people have had almost whole lifetimes of doing things in a different way. And this new configuration of the family is going to take some time to get used to, and it could be difficult. So really understanding that particular process as well. On the spot interventions. So sometimes if you got things that happen right in the meeting with the family, it's about doing the intervention right there on the spot and looking at destructive effects of communication. So if people are name calling or doing things that are really harmful to people that can identify their own dysfunctional behavior, it's about addressing those things immediately and looking at how we can reproduce or we can decrease some of that counterproductive behavior and come up with some different ways to look at that whole process as well. And then achieving that delicate balance between singling out one person as a call of interpersonal difficulty. So again, as the social worker, you have to be very careful that you don't want to create the illusion of an alliance and making sure that you're not focusing on one particular person, but although one person may contribute more to the problems, all the members are genuinely contributing difficulties in some degree. So everybody's a part of the problem, everybody's a part of the solution. Assisting families in disengaging from conflict, avoid that competitive struggles, competitive argument situations. Disengaging simply means that families avoid escalating arguments by declining to participate further. So somebody's just got to bud out. Being able to negotiate those particular tasks in that particular process as well. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of what you're going to be in for as your career as a social worker working with families, in terms of some of the different techniques that you'll be able to employ in terms of working with them to actually increase and enhance family functioning. So, as always, do your readings and come to class prepared, or be prepared to do some follow-up activities in the lab. We'll talk to you soon.